It began with something so unusual, so out of place, that even the most experienced American intelligence analysts didn't know what to make of it. A message came across the radio, short, sharp, rhythmic, and spoken in a language that sounded nothing like English, German, Japanese, or even anything found in the thick linguistics manuals used by Allied decoding units. German and Japanese intercept operators listened again and again, replaying the scratchy radio signal under headphones, adjusting dials, slowing down the recording, speeding it up. Nothing helped. The words didn't match any known structure. Not Latin-based, not Germanic, not Slavic, not Asian. It was like listening to a voice from a forgotten world. But the strangest part wasn't just the sound. It was the reaction. Within hours, Japanese cryptographers issued urgent reports warning that America had developed a new kind of encryption, one so unfamiliar that it might change the direction of the entire war. And yet the truth was even more shocking. It wasn't a machine at all. It was a language the U.S. had once punished schoolchildren for speaking. A language banned in classrooms, erased in missions, beaten out of generations. And now it was the only code the enemy couldn't break. So here's the question. And it's the question that will change everything you think you know about. World War II. How did a language America tried to destroy become the one thing that saved an entire invasion? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is one of the most extraordinary stories the war ever produced, and one history almost forgot. By 1942, Pacific was collapsing into chaos. The American military was operating on the edge of disaster. Every major movement, every convoy, every battalion redeployment, every bombing run depended on coded messages. But the Japanese were masters of code breaking. They cracked American encryption systems so fast that generals sometimes found the enemy reacting to orders only minutes after they were sent. Imagine the frustration, the helplessness. Commanders couldn't even move ammunition without worrying the Japanese already knew which ship carried it. And intelligence officers, they were desperate. They tried new systems, new ciphers, new frequencies, even machines so bulky they filled entire rooms. And still, enemy codebreakers tore through them like paper. It felt like America was trapped in a constant race against a ghost every time they invented a new code. The Japanese were already halfway through breaking it. Then came an idea so unusual people thought it was a joke. Use an indigenous language, specifically one spoken only in isolated tribal lands, as the foundation for a battlefield code. At first, officers dismissed it outright. This language wasn't widely written. It wasn't taught in universities. Many considered it primitive, and intelligence officers were trained to trust mathematics, not culture. But this wasn't primitive at all. It was a linguistic fortress, complex tones, rare sounds, layered meanings, and structures so different from English that even professional linguists struggled to chart them. And the men who spoke it, the code talkers, weren't soldiers who sought fame or recognition. They were young men from reservations, many of whom had grown up in poverty, discrimination, and educational systems that punished them for speaking their own tongue. Think about that irony. America had spent decades trying to kill their language, and now it needed that same language to survive. The idea sounded crazy to outsiders, unpredictable, uncontrolled, too dependent on human skill instead of machines. But inside this crazy idea was the seed of something revolutionary, something that would soon prove more powerful than any cipher. Machine America had built. When the first group of code talkers arrived at the military base, the air was thick with skepticism, tension, and a faint trace of fear. These young men, barely out of their teens, carried nothing more than notebooks, pencils, and voices that spoke a language their instructors had spent years trying to eradicate. Officers in pressed uniforms whispered among themselves, glancing at the boys with thinly veiled doubt. They weren't equipped with cipher machines, advanced radios, or mathematical formulas. What they had was their language or sequence of sounds, tones, and syllables that had been forbidden in classrooms, punished in schools, and ignored by most Americans. Yet in the hushed corridors of intelligence, a quiet curiosity had begun to form. Could it actually work? Could a language, spoken by people who had been systematically silenced, be the very thing that turned the tide of a faltering war? The first demonstration began in a small room filled with analysts, officers, and linguists, all leaning forward in disbelief. The boys recited messages that encoded complex military instructions, troop movements, artillery coordinates, supply convoys. And yet, within seconds, they translated entire battle plans into their language without a single error. The observers were stunned. The operators who had mocked them just moments ago couldn't hide their wide-eyed astonishment. And when Japanese intelligence intercepted their messages, chaos erupted. Cryptographers on the other side, accustomed to breaking the most intricate codes, found themselves staring at a wall of incomprehensible syllables. Their charts, graphs, and algorithms were useless. For days, they replayed the intercepted signals, slowed them down, sped them up, isolated each tone, compared it to known phonetic patterns, and nothing worked. They couldn't even begin to understand the structure. Officers in Tokyo demanded explanations. Superiors in Berlin raised alarms, convinced the Americans had developed some revolutionary encryption machine. Meanwhile, the young code talkers practiced tirelessly, unaware that every word they spoke carried the weight of thousands of soldiers' lives. They trained under the sun, through sand, rain, and wind, repeating messages over and over, ensuring perfect clarity and speed. Yet tension never eased. Every mispronounced syllable could cause disaster. Every lost transmission could cost lives. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling session, Japanese patrol intercepted a complex series of messages meant to coordinate an entire landing operation. Analysts waited nervously to see if their tests would work. The messages were received in Tokyo. Every machine, every cryptographer, every analyst tried to decipher them. Hours passed. Anxiety filled the air. Then came the reports. Unable to decode. No recognizable pattern. Impossible to break. Officers stared at one another, jaws tight. The same men who had laughed at these young soldiers now understood that something monumental was happening. Still, no one moved too quickly to celebrate. The test was only a rehearsal, and in the minds of the skeptical generals, real combat could expose flaws, errors, and failures. Yet as the days passed, more tests reinforced the truth. On every intercepted message, Japanese intelligence failed. Not sometimes, not occasionally, but consistently. And with every failure, the tension and suspense escalated. Commanders realized that while every other American code had been compromised, this one language remained a fortress, invisible, untouchable, unstoppable. Small victories and practice drills became crucial proofs that the boys' language could survive real battle conditions. Officers watched, increasingly anxious, as young code talkers repeated sequences that conveyed entire battalion movements in under a minute. Tasks that usually took cipher machines 30 minutes to encode. Every phrase, every tone, every subtle inflection mattered. One minor mistake could be catastrophic. And yet, the boys succeeded, time and time again. Building suspense not only for the enemy, but also for their own commanders, who had yet to fully grasp the scope of what was happening. Rumors began to ripple across the base. Whispers of a miracle code began to circulate. Journalists, barred from details, could only speculate. Soldiers passing through the training grounds reported seeing strange sessions, boys in concentration, repeating sequences with flawless speed, officers taking frantic notes, analysts scratching their heads in confusion. One general remarked quietly, "It's like watching the impossible become routine." But the real suspense loomed beyond the walls of the base. Soon these code talkers would be deployed to real combat zones, facing not just the Japanese cipher machines, but the unpredictability of war itself. Shelling, ambushes, weather, fatigue, and death. The tension in their hearts was mirrored in every officer's gaze. Questions circled endlessly. Would it work under fire? Could boys maintain clarity when shells were falling around them? Could this untested language truly save lives where machines and conventional codes had failed? Every test so far suggested yes. Yet every officer knew that victory in theory was not victory in reality. And so, the suspense intensified as deployment orders came in. For the code talkers, It was simple. Perform perfectly, transmit flawlessly, and survive. For the enemy, it was a growing nightmare. For America, it was the first glimpse of a new weapon. Human ingenuity encoded in a language once thought useless. And as the first missions began, every heartbeat, every transmission, every intercepted message added layers of suspense. Would this banned language save the invasion? Could a handful of young men change the fate of thousands of soldiers, a fleet of ships, and the entire theater of war? The answers were coming, but slowly, agonizingly, deliberately, keeping commanders, code analysts, and even the enemy on edge. Each moment was a cliffhanger. Each transmission, a suspenseful chapter in a story the world would only fully understand decades later. And every person involved realized, deep down, that something extraordinary was unfolding, something that would rewrite what war codes could be and what language itself could accomplish, only when the young code talkers were deployed. In real combat zones did the full magnitude of their mission become terrifyingly clear. The battles they faced were not just against enemy soldiers, but against time, chaos, and the unseen intelligence networks that had been dismantling American strategies for years. Every beach landing, every jungle advance, every coordinated strike relied on rapid, secure communication. The enemy had already proven time and again that they could intercept and decipher even the most sophisticated machine-generated codes. But now, a small group of young men armed with nothing more than their voices, their memory, and a language their country had once tried to erase, became the living key to the survival of thousands. They spoke in rapid sequences, converting complex military orders into an intricate tapestry of syllables, tones, and metaphors, each layer more impenetrable than the last. Yet what made their work astonishing and terrifying to their commanders was the duality of simplicity and complexity. To the trained ear of an American officer, these messages sounded like mere words, occasionally laced with unfamiliar patterns. To the enemy, however, every intercepted transmission became an impenetrable code, a riddle without a solution. In one legendary operation, the code talkers transmitted precise landing coordinates for an amphibious assault under heavy artillery fire. The Japanese, listening intently, heard the entire plan, but could not interpret a single instruction. Commanders in Tokyo replayed the signals, slowed them down, isolated phonetic components, compared them to all known linguistic structures, but the code refused to bend. For hours they sat in confusion and panic, and that day the landing was flawless. Not a single ship strayed off course. Not a single unit was lost due to miscommunication. Historians later noted that this event alone saved over 2,000 lives. But at the time, the secrecy surrounding the operation ensured that few outside the inner circle would ever know. As the war progressed, the code talkers faced increasingly dangerous assignments. On Guadalcanal, they transmitted instructions under the constant threat of sniper fire, artillery bombardment, and ambushes. On Bougainville, they relayed messages for entire brigades, ensuring synchronized strikes that outmaneuvered Japanese positions. Yet the code talkers' genius was never in their bravery alone, but in the language itself, a structure so alien, so deeply rooted in a cultural context deliberately erased by American schools and laws, that no foreign cryptographer could ever hope to interpret it. They layered it with invented metaphors, words for animals. Everyday objects and natural phenomena replaced military terms. Tank became caterpillar. Machine gun became whistling wind. Battalion became flock of birds. These substitutions made it virtually impossible for any outsider to map the spoken words to battlefield reality, and the Japanese, no matter how brilliant their mathematicians or linguists, were left completely bewildered. The code talkers didn't stop at language alone. They developed rapid conversion methods, signaling shorthand and improvisational phrases that could adjust in real time to changing battlefield conditions. They memorized every phrase, every metaphor, every nuance. Under pressure, in the chaos of shell fire, mud, and screaming soldiers, they never faltered. Each transmission was flawless. Each message was a lifeline. Each word a weapon against death itself. In one particularly harrowing incident during the Pacific Campaign, a landing force faced near total destruction because an expected supply convoy was delayed. The code talkers immediately transmitted updated coordinates, instructions, and timing adjustments in real time. The message reached commanders. The supply convoy rerouted perfectly, and the troops survived. The Japanese, who had intercepted the messages, reported internally that the Americans had an invisible machine, something beyond comprehension. But the truth was human, living, breathing, and speaking a language so forbidden it had become invincible. And yet the brilliance of the reveal was not just in survival, but in scale. Across dozens of operations, hundreds of messages, and thousands of soldiers, the code talkers consistently outperformed every mechanical, electronic, or mathematical code system the Allies had ever deployed. Entire campaigns relied on them. Entire lives were spared because of them. Yet, astonishingly, the world remained unaware. The enemy feared them, but the general public did not know. Historians later noted that without these code talkers, some invasions would have failed. Entire divisions could have been decimated. Thousands of lives would have been lost. And all of it hinged on a language the country had once sought to eradicate, a linguistic weapon born from oppression. Now a shield of survival, their methods were perfect, their courage absolute, and their legacy, for decades, invisible. But in every message, in every transmission, in every life saved, the truth screamed louder than any battlefield cannon. This banned language had changed the course of history, and no code, machine, or algorithm could ever replicate what these young men had accomplished. As the sun rose over the Pacific Islands, illuminating the chaos of war, the code talkers continued their work, unfazed by bullets, storms, and the impossible weight of expectation. Every syllable they spoke was a thread in the fabric of victory. Every sentence was a line in the blueprint of survival. And as Japanese intelligence crumbled in confusion, commanders realized, with growing awe and disbelief, that the key to winning the war had never been a machine, a formula, or technology, but something far simpler, far more human, and far more extraordinary, a language that refused to be broken, and the courage of those who spoke it. The war did not end the moment the bombs ceased, or when the last bullet fell. It lingered in whispers, in memories, and in deeds that no history books dared fully record. The young code talkers, once laughed at, once forbidden from speaking their own language in schools and homes, had transformed the tide of entire invasions, unseen, unheralded, and unbroken. They returned from the islands, the jungles, and the beaches, carrying not just medals or commendations, but the weight of thousands of lives saved through syllables and sounds, a weight that few could truly comprehend. Their language, once banned, had become the most potent weapon in the hands of the Allies. A cipher so impenetrable that entire enemy fleets and battalions had been rendered helpless, their meticulously plotted plans unraveling in real time before the Americans could even utter the words that encoded victory. Soldiers who had brushed past these young men without notice now bowed in quiet reverence, understanding that their own survival had hinged on the voices of those whom the nation had once sought to silence. And yet, outside the immediate theater of operations, the world remained ignorant. Newspapers reported victories but rarely mentioned the code talkers. Commanders praised ingenious strategies and unbreakable codes without ever revealing that these codes were living, breathing human voices, unbound by machines or mathematics. The irony was almost cruel. The very country that had outlawed their language and punished their use in schools now owed its victories to it, a secret woven into the fabric of every mission. Families of the code talkers waited anxiously, fearing that the boys would not return, yet unaware of the scale of their accomplishments. When letters finally arrived, vague and coded to protect secrecy, they spoke of danger, bravery, and the strange beauty of language as a weapon. The boys themselves remained humble. Few spoke of glory. Few sought recognition. They knew that their success had come at a cost, tension so thick it could suffocate, missions so perilous that every second felt like an eternity, and the constant knowledge that one mistake could unravel months of meticulous coordination. They had witnessed Mendy for errors far smaller than a mispronounced syllable. And yet day after day, hour after hour, they persevered. Their language had not merely conveyed information, it had conveyed survival, hope, and strategy simultaneously. And as the last battles ended, and occupation forces moved in, the aftermath unfolded in both the public and private spheres. Official reports credited victories to unbreakable ciphers or advanced communications, leaving the true architects, the code talkers, hidden in footnotes, almost as though history itself had conspired to forget them. In secret debriefings, generals admitted that entire campaigns would have faltered without these linguistic warriors. Each successful landing, each resupplied battalion, each captured strategic point carried the imprint of the boys' voices, the cadence of their syllables, and the precision of their memory. And yet, despite their monumental contribution, the boys returned to a country that had little understanding of their work. Many were demobilized quietly, sent home to towns and cities that had never recognized the genius in their silence, the courage in their speech, or the power of a language once forbidden. Some struggled to reconcile ordinary civilian life with the extraordinary feats they had accomplished. Memories of intercepted enemy communications, the panic in enemy command centers, and the vivid imagery of battlefield success haunted their nights. They remembered how Japanese cryptographers had screamed in frustration over impossible codes, how entire battalions had faltered, and how, for a brief moment, human ingenuity alone had turned the tide of history. And yet even in obscurity, their influence continued. Commanders adapted procedures based on lessons learned from code talker communications, and military strategy increasingly incorporated human ingenuity alongside machinery, recognizing that the true limit of warfare was not technology, but the creativity and courage of those who wielded it. Schools and communities remained largely unaware, but whispers among veterans officers. And historians hinted at the impossible, that a language silenced for generations had quietly reshaped the course of a global conflict. Generals who had doubted, officers who had mocked, and soldiers who had ignored them now carried an enduring respect for what had been achieved. And when the boys gathered years later, in reunions, held quietly and away from public attention, they shared memories of missions that had never been officially documented, victories that had never been fully celebrated, and dangers that had been narrowly avoided. Each story, each recollection, reinforced a profound truth. The most powerful weapon in warfare is not always found in guns, tanks, or planes, but in the human mind, in the courage to speak, in the audacity to use what others deem worthless. Their language had survived censorship, punishment, and neglect. It had defied enemy intelligence, machines, and decades of doubt. It had saved countless lives, turned the tide of invasions, and demonstrated that ingenuity often lies hidden in the most unexpected forms. And still, the story was not widely told. Files remained classified for decades, recognition came slowly, and the world only began to appreciate the scale of their contribution long after the war ended. Yet, for those who had lived it, the boys themselves, their commanders, and the soldiers they saved, the truth was undeniable. History had been shaped by voices that refused to be silenced. A secret woven into the very fabric of victory, proof that courage, intelligence, in a single human language could do what no machine ever could. And as the sun set over distant battlefields, over islands liberated and cities saved, the legacy of these code talkers endured in silence, uncelebrated publicly, yet immortal in its consequence. A reminder that sometimes the smallest, most forbidden things words spoken, not machines built, can change the world forever. And while their story ends here, the echoes of their voices continue to teach, inspire, and confound anyone who dares to think that war is won by force alone, revealing instead that ingenuity, courage, and a language once banned can save thousands, rewrite history, and leave an unbreakable mark on the world.